Hello and welcome to the Western PA CoC Written Standards Training specific for providers operating street outreach projects. My name is Lauren Whitley. I work for Diana T. Myers and Associates, or DMA. We are the consultant for the Western PA CoC. So the written standards are required by HUD. Every CoC must have a set of standards that provides guidance to CoC and ESG funded projects related to operations and service delivery. And the goal of the written standards is to ensure that all projects are operating in a consistent, coordinated way that's compliant with HUD and CoC expectations. The Western PA CoC written standards really go above and beyond HUD's minimum requirements to make the document a helpful tool and resource for providers operating ESG and CoC funded projects. The document is broken into three main sections. There are standards for all project types. If you have not already watched the recorded training on standards for all project types, please make sure you do so. Then there are project-specific standards, and that's what we're covering in this presentation. We're covering the standards that are specific to street outreach projects. And finally, there are appendices that provide supplemental information and resources that are referenced throughout the standards. There's an accompanying supplemental document that's optional forms and templates. It's not required to use those templates, but they are available to you as a resource. So again, if you have not already watched the training on standards for all project types, please make sure to do so. And today's this presentation will focus on the requirements that are specific to street outreach projects. First and foremost, the goals of street outreach are to provide essential services necessary to reach people experiencing unsheltered homelessness, to connect those folks with emergency shelter, housing, or other critical services, and to reach people who might not otherwise seek assistance or come to the attention of the homeless service system. How do folks access street outreach projects? Outreach workers are able to enroll households across the community outside office walls, engaging with participants early and often. Street outreach projects must provide the access, diversion, assessment, prioritization, and referral phases of coordinated entry as described in the coordinated entry policies and procedures. And street outreach projects must provide the prevention phase of coordinated entry only to the extent necessary to determine whether or not a participant is experiencing literal homelessness and refer them to an appropriate service provider. If street outreach projects are funded to provide the prevention and rapid exit phases of coordinated entry, they must use a progressive engagement approach that incorporates housing problem-solving prevention techniques to serve households with case management, supportive services, and financial assistance, including one-time payments and short-term housing assistance to identify the lightest touch method to successfully reestablish each household into safe, stable, permanent housing. Who is eligible for street outreach? Folks who meet HUD's definition of literal homelessness, or who are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, and they must be living on the streets or other places not meant for habitation, and be unwilling or unable to access emergency shelter services. How are folks prioritized for street outreach projects? Anyone who is unsheltered is prioritized for street outreach. Some documentation requirements specific to street outreach projects. Street outreach projects should be working with participants to obtain their necessary documents. So whether that's IDs, birth certificates, social security cards, verification of chronic homeless status, documentation of disability, etc. And street outreach projects must document efforts in case files to demonstrate that they are working with participants to obtain their necessary documents. And of course, in addition to this specific documentation requirement, there are documentation requirements for all project types in the written standards. So you want to reference those as well. Duration and amounts of assistance. There should be repeated attempts to assist households experiencing unsheltered homelessness, of course, respecting participant choice. No one is terminated from street outreach unless they are housed. So housed in a housing situation of their choice. They indicate that they no longer need street outreach services and request that their case be closed, or they pose a serious threat of harm to the outreach staff or other participants in the street outreach project. So street outreach projects should be housing focused, emphasize safety and reducing harm, and should be coordinated and comprehensive. ESG funded street outreach staff and teams must participate in and or lead the unsheltered point in time count in their community. Case managers and street outreach projects really focus on establishing trust and focus on building positive relationships with folks who are unsheltered. Street outreach projects are conducting an initial assessment of needs and prioritizing safety and urgent health needs. And to the greatest extent possible, street outreach staff are completing the coordinated entry assessment out in the field. Other case management standards specific to street outreach are that case managers are linking unsheltered folks to places to get warm, to address their basic needs, provide basic survival items, provide assistance with accessing benefits, services, and housing. Participants should be linked to housing and services by way of a warm handoff, so that's rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing, if someone who is unsheltered is being offered an opportunity in those project types. And then street outreach services should be targeted to assisting households achieve housing stability as quickly as possible. For duration and amounts of assistance, someone can be enrolled for as long as needed based on participant choice in a street outreach project. And performance measures specific to this project type are that at least 84% of households served by a street outreach project will exit to housing of their choice. So for next steps, all CoC and ESG funded projects will sign off by April 30th that their program has reviewed the written standards, they understand the standards, they commit to implementing them, they've watched the training recordings, and will ensure that all new hires review the standards and watch the training recordings within 60 days of hire, using this link on the screen, which will be shared widely. If there are standards that your project is not currently implementing, please make a plan to implement those by June 30th. And of course, feedback on the standards is welcome year-round at the link on the screen, which will also be shared widely. We welcome any and all feedback, and the Written Standards Committee will take that into consideration during the next round of updates. As always, thank you so much for the work you do. If you have any questions, please email the CoC at westerncoc@pennsylvaniacoc.org. Thank you and have a great day.